And the sovereign is like, what are you gonna do? The same thing's gonna happen when you're in charge 100 years later. You know, saying what Mockingjay said. There's a great moment when Darrow's like, no, we'll be different. Everybody has a vote. You know what I mean? It's kind of like...
Democracy will
It's just
save
so funny
us.
when fantasy does rebellion and then they're like, democracy. I think it's so funny. It just seems so out of place to me.
Yeah, it does. Hello and welcome to the Your Favorite Book podcast. I'm Tanner.
I'm Malorie. We're siblings.
And we like reading books. And today we are going to talk about Morningstar by Pierce Brown.
It's the third book in the Red Rising trilogy. I think that's what the trilogy is called.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, I read Red Rising quite a while ago, maybe 2 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the first books that I thought of when we wanted to do this podcast, because it was something I recommended to you. I thought you would enjoy. And doing the podcast was a good excuse for me to make you read that.
Yep, keep us accountable.
Yes, and vice versa.
Yeah.
You can go back and listen to our first two episodes. We think they're pretty good, but we're biased.
Yes.
But for those of you who haven't listened to those and are sticking around, thank you. And we are going to get Mallory's thoughts today on how she felt about this book.
Yes.
I know that you were kind of lukewarm on the first two books.
Yeah, that's a good way
Not
to
a lot
put
of
it.
terrible things to say, but it maybe just wasn't your cup of tea.
Yeah.
You brought up some things about the story that I hadn't considered, because when I was reading it, I just enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking to criticize it. And it's interesting, you and I talking about like the reasons why you didn't find it quite as enjoyable as I did. Why certain things stood out to you.
Yeah.
And that didn't stand out to me. That weren't a problem for me.
Yeah. I also think it's interesting to look at, like, when I read a book for this podcast, and when you read a book for this podcast, we're definitely consuming the content in a different way than if you're like, oh, I just picked up this book off of whatever. I'm just going to read it to enjoy it. Versus if I'm like, what can I talk about this book? The plot, the characters, the, like the action, stuff like that. Like, it's interesting to see, because I felt the same way about Bonesmith. I read it just for plain enjoyment, and that was our first episode, and you read it for less than enjoyment.
Yeah. We've learned a lot since then. I've learned a lot since then.
I have too. It's fun.
Yeah, I do enjoy reading books to critique them or analyze them. That's fun for me. Yeah. I haven't been able to do that in a while, and I've really enjoyed doing that for this podcast. But it's almost like now we not rarely, but I guess it's more that we read books to figure out why we enjoy them instead of just enjoying them.
Yeah.
It's like you don't need to read everything through this like critical lens, but sometimes it's fun.
Yeah.
I enjoy reading.
And it's also fun to be able to point out why you enjoyed something instead of just being like, oh, it was good. I don't know. I liked it.
Yeah. I like digging a little deeper.
I do too. I think it's fun.
The best is when, I really enjoy ranting about books that I don't like.
Oh, me too. Sometimes
Obviously.
I enjoy a bad book more than I enjoy a good book.
Yeah. I feel like I learn more from a book that I don't enjoy.
Yes.
And it's kind of frustrating when you read a book that you love and it's like, I don't know, what can I say about it?
Yeah.
Because I just enjoyed everything. I can't really point to anything specific.
Yes.
But we'll get into that more next week, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Which a little a little hint, a little bait. Yeah.
So the Red Rising series follows a guy named Darrow who lives in a world in which there are classes of colors, and there's, golds, which are the top tier, and reds, which are the bottom. Darrow is born a red, dies, basically gets resurrected almost, and is turned into a gold and sent in to become this rebellion leader to overthrow the golds so that the reds and lower colors are no longer slaves. It's a classic rebellion story. It's done pretty well. I mean, I always love a rebellion story.
Pretty well. How dare you. It's the best thing ever.
We also just did Hunger Games recently, which is nice because these have a lot of comparable things in it.
Yeah.
A lot,
That's
actually.
part of the reason why I wanted you to read Red Rising.
Yeah.
I thought it'd be a nice mirror to our Hunger Games series.
Yeah,
So
it is.
we can make a lot of comparisons between the two. We just finished Mockingjay, which is perfect timing.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious how you feel about Morningstar.
Morningstar.
Oh my God. Not Mockingjay. Because for me, my big problem with Mockingjay was that I felt like the plot was stalling for like the entire book until the last like 80%. And then finally Katniss had something to do. Like she was filming propaganda, and we didn't see how that propaganda was affecting the rebellion.
Yeah.
And the whole goal was to save PETA or overthrow the Capitol. And you can go ahead and go back and watch that. But I think at the end of that video, we decided that rebellion stories are really difficult to write.
Yeah.
Thematically, it was a difficult one for me to cope with, especially because Mockingjay, sorry. Thematically, Mockingjay was difficult for me to cope with because it was so dark and depressing. There were like no high notes.
Yeah.
It was all sad. And apparently you loved that.
I did.
Which I don't get because you're a sad person in real life.
I am,
I'm joking.
I suppose. Well, it's funny that you bring that up.
Because I know Morningstar is also very dark.
It is.
But for me, when I was reading that book, I felt like the character relationships were more charming.
Yeah. There were a lot.
Even though it was really sad, obviously. Yeah. It's a dark book to read.
It is, but there were a lot more glimmers of happiness and light in there. Like, you know, you'd have this great epic battle and they'd lose someone, and then there would be a really fun moment between Severo and Darrow where it's like, hey, we're brothers, we're in this together. Also, you're weird.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, oh, okay, it's for something.
God bless you.
Thank you. Versus Mockingjay is just, I'm still traumatized.
I'm in the hospital
There's no
again.
Hope. They sedated me for a month straight and I still... it's very different.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Okay.
And I liked that aspect in Morningstar a lot.
You felt like the characters were more, the secondary characters were more interesting.
Yeah. So Morningstar picks up pretty soon after the end of book 2, which, duh, spoilers, we say that every episode. I think you're all used to it by now. But at the end of book 2, Darrow gets betrayed by one of his close friends, Cassius, and he gets stolen?
Kidnapped?
Kidnapped. He becomes a prisoner of war for the Jackal, which is fantastic. I love that character.
Yeah,
and
he's a good villain.
Yeah, he is. It's fun. And so the third book picks up where he's been imprisoned for about a year, I think. Close to a year. And he's been tortured and starved and, you know, every evil thing under the book. We pick up right there in the middle of it.
At the end of book 2, all of Darrow's plans to like become Augustine's son are dashed. Yeah. He's attending this wedding.
A gala. Sorry,
with all the other golds. Where he's like, it feels victorious to celebrate his win.
Yeah.
And then he gets betrayed. It's a really great cliffhanger. And part of the reason why I liked book 2 so much, personally.
Yeah, it's so... And Pierce Brown does a great job at helping the reader understand the motivations of all of his characters. Yeah. Because you see Cassius hit Darrow right where it hurts. But you're like, well...
It makes sense.
I can see it. He's been lying to him his whole life, and Cassius thought he was his brother. Like, it's fantastic. Which is heartbreaking and fun to read. I don't know if fun is the right word, but
it is
enthralling almost. So I was excited to pick up book 3 because, you know, it was a fantastic cliffhanger. And you know what? Call me a creepy weirdo, but I wanted to experience some of the evil torturing. I wanted that. I want to see someone's spirit be broken, which Darrow's spirit doesn't get broken when he's being tortured, which is good. I don't think it does.
Oh.
His spirit?
Okay. I don't know what you mean by that, because I felt like at the beginning of book 3, he was a broken man.
Yeah.
What is wrong with you?
I don't know.
You want him to be even more broken?
Yes, I did. I feel like Darrow's character, I think we talked about this in the first book. He's a little bit perfect. He's
he's totally perfect. Yeah.
I don't like that. And I enjoyed seeing the faults in his characters from when he trusts too much in the people around him.
Yeah.
And I like that. And I wanted more imperfections in the beginning so that we can see the growth. And there is a lot of growth. You are right. He is pretty damaged in the beginning of the third book.
Yeah.
And we see him heal with his friends and in the world and, I don't know, mend relationships that he's been frustrated with, I guess. But I don't know. I guess you're right. He was pretty sad at the beginning. But I wanted him to be completely comatose with trauma, like Katniss in Mockingjay.
I guess so, but the problem with having a comatose character is your story becomes really boring. Because all they do is sit in the hospital like this.
Yes.
Film a commercial, put some makeup on me, but not too much.
Yeah. You're correct. And I'm correct. That's the great things about opinions.
I guess so. That is, yeah. I like a story where character wants to get a thing. And they go on a grand adventure, and they fight battle after battle to go get that thing. And that's what Red Rising is, to me.
Yes, it is.
It is like a series of horribly violent, gratuitous battles.
Yes.
And to me, that's fun.
Yeah.
It's like a game.
I can see why you like that book, because that's what all collective 1,600 pages were about.
Yes, it is.
I don't know how many pages. Anyway.
Yeah. So I see what you're saying, though, about Darrow. You want him to have some more internal trauma.
Yes.
Because for me, I see his character arc as he's going from... And they really do this best in the first book. I think it really is the best one. It's probably the most cliched.
Yeah.
It's done very well. Where Darrow is a red masquerading as a gold. And he is... dealing with making real, genuine connections with golds, even though he hates them, and he blames them for destroying his life and lives of his family and killing his wife. That internal trauma, that character arc of going from someone who turns away from revenge and accepts reformation and forgiveness. That's an interesting character arc to me.
Yeah.
And maybe it's like, for 3 books, like stretching that character arc out is difficult to do.
Yeah.
Where it's like, how many times can Darrow feel like, oh, I hate the golds,
but I'll forgive him again.
I think that's probably why characters like Titus, is that his name? Not Titus.
In the first one?
In the second book, it's
Tactus?
Tactus. I always mix him up with Titus.
That's
I had to think tactician, which is a great name because he's like a scheming dude, double crosser.
Yeah.
That's why I think characters like Tactus are important because he challenges his misbelief.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Very well.
So I think characters like that are really important for Darrow because they highlight his conflict, which is, ooh, these golds, they keep on betraying me. And, you know, maybe that's kind of absent in the third book.
I think so. And it's interesting to see an author highlight those flaws in a character using secondary characters instead of finding it in the main character.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
But it's done really well, and I really like that. Like, the character relationships in this book...
super diverse.
Yes, and complex.
And complex. They all have their own motivations. They feel like real characters. To me, I think Red Rising would make an amazing anime.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. That would be so much fun. It would be perfect.
Yeah. I love a big cast of characters.
Yeah.
That's why I love something like Demon Slayer or My Hero Academia. Where it's like the protagonist isn't super interesting, especially on their own.
Yes.
But it's the characters around them that make their world feel so colorful.
Yeah, and when we were talking about the second book, I was missing a lot of those relationships and a lot of those conversations and confrontations.
Yeah.
And we got so much of that in book 3, which I loved.
So why is that? Like, what happens to the plot in the second book versus the third book that creates that environment?
So in the second book, Darrow tells the truth about himself being a red and transformed into a gold to those who are close to him. Slowly, one by one, he does that.
And he says, I'm overthrowing the empire.
Yeah, he's like, hey, I want to murder you and all of your family members.
Will you join me?
Yeah, like, okay. And the biggest qualm I had with book 2 was the conversation between Darrow and Mustang, who is the love interest, but also way more complex than just the love interest, which is fantastic.
Thematically, she represents more to him than just a fine body.
Yes. And she is very important.
Yeah.
The book wouldn't happen without her, which is good. But the conversation between those two about that is just skipped over and actually doesn't really happen that much.
Yeah.
And she leaves. Basically leaves radio silence, nothing. And we get to pick that relationship back up in book 3, and we get much more conversations and much more of Darrow seeing how much he's hurt her.
Mm-hmm.
And watching her, both of them want to repair the bridge between them, but both of them are too stubborn and, quite frankly, too busy to do it. You know, they're like, you're pretty cute, but...
I've got a rebellion to run.
Yeah, which is fun. I like that.
Yeah.
It feels more real to me. And, like, I really enjoy that, and I usually prefer a little bit of romance with my fantasy rather than romance with a little bit of fantasy. So I like that about this book. And we also get Cassius, who betrays him in the end of the second book. They capture him in the third book in about the middle, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And we get a lot of fantastic tense moments and tense relationships between the members of Darrow's clique and Cassius, because they all have different opinions on him and what he's done. And most of them are like...
Which is another good example of, like, your secondary characters are all individuals.
Yeah, versus everybody just lining up with what the main character believes.
Yeah.
That's so much more static and boring.
Yeah.
And Pierce Brown really embraces those differences.
Yeah.
And you can understand where each character is coming from, too. Like, it's not just, character C has a different opinion just to cause fights. It's like, no, they feel this way because this happened in book 2 and this happened in book 1. Like, it's fun and complex. It's very well thought out, I guess.
Right. So from what I remember from book 3, it's been a while since I've read it, is that Darrow, he comes back to become the real, true leader of the rebellion.
Yeah.
And he's with all of his friends again. And that's because, who's the name of Severo's father that dies? Fitchner. Mm-hmm. He dies in the second book, and he was the leader. He was Ares, who is from the Sons of Ares. Mm-hmm. And Darrow kind of assumes that role eventually.
Yes.
Not at the very beginning.
Yeah.
And there's a great, a great moment when he does assume leadership, which I don't know if we'll talk about, but it was one of my favorite, most memorable parts of the third book.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why Darrow is around his friends more. It's because there's no more secrets.
Yes.
He's around Mustang, Severo, Victra, and you get a lot more character dynamic stuff, and Ragnar.
Yeah.
And in the second book, maybe it feels more like he's just following Augustine around.
Yeah.
And doing what he tells him to. And he's kind of alone.
And I think he also pushes everybody away because he holds a lot of guilt of...
Yeah.
I'm not good. I am actively lying to the people I love about not something small, who I am. Like, which is good and complex, but it was a little too lonely for me.
Okay, I see. Well, it's interesting because it almost feels like what you wanted from the third book was more of that internal conflict that was present in the second
book. Yeah.
But then it's almost like the problems switched.
Yes.
Where it's like you get all the character dynamics.
Individual.
No. This all tracks.
Yeah.
Because in the third book you get more of those character dynamics which you loved in the first book, which was chock full of that stuff. Because it was more like an academia book. Where it's like all these kids, they get to know each other, they're around each other all the time, and they're going to learn how to become scarred golds. Yeah. And that was also absent in the second book. Yeah. It's funny because it's like I love the character dynamic stuff a lot too. But I think the plot to me in the second book was really interesting. Yeah. Because I wanted to watch how Darrow could overthrow the Empire, basically. Yeah. It was an interesting position for him to be in. But yeah, that's interesting.
It is interesting. It's like book 1 had both of the elements that I wanted, and then book 2 dropped one of them, and book 3 dropped the other.
But picked up the other one that the second one dropped.
Yeah. If you're following this, congratulations.
You're as smart as we is.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I didn't think of it that way, but that's totally it. That's totally it.
So I guess Darrow has less of a character arc in the third book.
Yeah, I think they're very different because in the first book, it's a lot more physical of an arc, I think. From him literally transforming from a red to take the place of the Gold Sons of Ares rebellion leader. Book 2 and 3 are both more emotional arcs, I think. I don't know. It's interesting. I think he does have a character arc going from, wow, I've killed everybody I care about, and now I'm trapped and stuck with my arch nemesis who is crazy.
This is the second book.
This is the third book.
The third book.
And then he gets back to his...
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I'm sorry.
No, at the beginning of the third book, he's trapped with the Jackal, who's the Darth Vader of Red Rising.
Yes.
He's just the villain.
Well, I also like in the third book that we get 2 enemies.
2,
like this.
Yeah, antagonists.
Pierce Brown does a really great job at having such a complex world in that Darrow kind of has to choose between the obvious enemy or the more nuanced enemy.
Yeah.
Because, like, even in the first book, it is the Jackal or the proctors of the test.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And in this third book, too, it's like, okay, at first, in book 2, it's just the Sovereign. And then book 3 happens and it's like, oh, maybe the Jackal is actually the ultimate enemy here, and that's what I have to worry about. And it's fun to see him and his team navigate the complexities there and to pick and choose which battles to fight and how to fight them to align better with the ultimate goal instead of the forefront obvious one.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. It makes the plot more complex and nuanced, where it's like your end goal is not as direct as you thought it would be.
Yeah.
Comparing it to Mockingjay, my problem was, and I didn't even mention this, but I don't think Suzanne Collins can write villains, like classical villains, like the Jackal, like the Sovereign. I'd say the Sovereign is more interesting, or I'm sorry, the Jackal is more interesting. That's just because he plays more role in the story.
Yeah, and the Sovereign, you're like, oh, she wants to keep power. Versus the Jackal, simple. You're like, I think you're just a little psychotic.
Yeah. And sometimes you can trust him and make deals. Mustang always says, never make a deal with the Jackal.
And she's always right.
And Darrow always doesn't listen to her.
Takes a chance, he gambles.
But his decisions always make sense.
Yeah.
He weighs the consequences of trusting the Jackal, and what the possible outcomes could be. Might reward him.
Yeah.
That's way more interesting than, we're fighting against the Sovereign and she never, ever appears in the story.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So she's there. She's kind of just like a plot device.
Yes.
Where it's like there's some external pressure on the main character to make these decisions. Like we're fighting against big ships. Like, okay.
Yeah.
That's more of a general threat as opposed to something very specific, like his relationship with the Jackal and the fact that he's Mustang's twin.
Yeah.
That's far more interesting. In Mockingjay, the bad guy is President Snow. And all he does is like appear on television and he broadcasts torturing PETA.
Yeah.
He's more similar to the Sovereign. There isn't like a Jackal character in... They're supposed to be. It's supposed to be
It's supposed to be coined, but it's not.
But she doesn't do anything
well.
either.
And it's just kind of in the end when Katniss is like...
All of a sudden, she's betrayed.
Whoa. And it's like, you could have... Yeah.
Why don't you expand
I
on
agree.
this? Like, you need to play a role throughout the story. Like, you need a good ramp up of conflict. And
it can't just be like, boom, at the end.
By the way, they betrayed you.
Yeah,
like, what? That came out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's not as impactful versus if you're experiencing the betrayal as a reader as you go along.
Yeah.
Then you're like, oh, darn
I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really difficult to do, obviously. And we talked about that a lot in Mockingjay. We don't have to get into it anymore. But that's probably what Pierce Brown does best, is writing this big epic story with lots of characters, and they all have different motivations, and he's tracking all of their types of progress.
Yeah, and he does such a great job at keeping tabs on all of them.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you get a big cast of characters, you kind of drop the ball on some characters until you need them the next time.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, okay, so-and-so's here at the end, even though we haven't seen them for the majority of the book. Like, where were they the whole time?
Yeah.
But he does a great job at keeping on top of all of them the whole time.
Yeah.
Like,
it brings that world to life.
Yeah, it does.
So it's like whenever he has to write a scene where Victra is present, she will always sound like Victra.
Yes.
And she's always focused on what she's trying to obtain. Who is such a great character,
I love
by the
Victra.
way. She's kind of like, well, it's not a super happy ending for her. Is it? Because I don't remember what happens at the end with Victra. But I know okay, spoiler alert, she gets married to Severo.
Oh, yeah.
Which is great.
It's so cute. It's so fun.
What I'm trying to say is Victra is kind of like the happy version of Tactus.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think so.
Where she's vicious.
And there's also a great moment when her sister is in their prison.
Her sister Antonia. Who is more of like a villainous character than her.
Very fun.
But their family has a certain reputation, right?
Yeah. And there's a great moment when Antonia attacks the people who are in there, and Victra pummels her, beats her up so bad. The description is...
It's gruesome.
It's gruesome. I remember exactly what it is, and I don't even know if I want to say it out loud.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad. And after she does this, she goes to Darrow and Severo, and she's like, I am just as bad as she is. Look what I just did to her. I am horrible. I am gross. I am evil. Objectively evil to do that to another person. And they're like, life is complex.
What you gonna do?
And then she's like, Severo, will you marry me?
And Severo's like, yes, my hero.
It's very cute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact that she reflects on her actions like that means she isn't like Antonia.
Versus Antonia is like, oh, she's just plastic surgery after you beat me up.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
She's like a vain and remorseless killer.
Yes. Yes.
Ever since the first book. And she doesn't really have an arc, but she's just a great character to have in this cast of characters.
Yeah. There's a great moment between when Antonia has been imprisoned. She's been imprisoned along with Thistle, who is one of Severo's...
Wolf gang.
What is it called?
The Howlers,
Howlers, who abandoned them and betrayed them.
Thistle betrayed them,
yeah.
And that was after Darrow came out and said, I'm a Red, and I'm part of the Sons of Ares, and now the rebellion is happening.
Yeah.
And so you get some people from his camp, his clique, like you said, who leave because they can't accept that. They can't reject their worldview.
Yes, they don't want to follow a Red leader.
Go ahead.
But there's a moment when Thistle and Antonia are both captured. And Antonia's like, you're going to kill us, aren't you? And Darrow's like, nope, I'll let you live. Whichever one of you tells me the most information lives. Do with that what you will. And then Antonia kills Thistle.
Yeah. Which is like, of course that's going to happen.
Yeah, and she like tricks her into it too. It's so... Reading that as a reader to watch how Antonia manipulates Thistle into that, and you're like, oh!
And what makes it even more heartbreaking is that Thistle is begging Darrow for forgiveness.
Yep.
And Darrow is the type who would forgive her.
And he wants to, too.
He's like this close, and I was hoping for her, like, to make that change so badly.
Me too.
Even though she plays such a small role in the story.
Yeah, but it's still fun, and you see Severo's group of underdogs who are so loyal with each other and will protect each other till they die, and to see one of those people break off but then to beg to come back, oh man, it's good. It's good.
He does that quite a bit where it's like he'll give a character an arc, and Thistle's arc is really small, where it's like all of a sudden she's kind of hit rock bottom, obviously, and she's begging for forgiveness. And it's like, okay, well, they can give her a chance to change. Everyone deserves a chance to change. That's the theme of the book. And then as soon as she's about to complete that arc, she dies.
Yep. And it's at the hands of someone who will never change.
Yeah.
Takes it away from her.
Yeah. It's horrible, but it's so compelling.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
There were a lot of small moments like that throughout the book that I loved.
Yeah, they're still impactful, even if it is half a page or something like that.
Yeah. For me, from what I remember about this book, I did not like it quite as much as the first two, personally. And this could dovetail into our discussion about the overall pacing or the plot.
Yeah.
Which I know that you told me before the podcast was something you had kind of an issue with as well.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it happened very quickly, especially at the second half of the book, where it's like, in order for Darrow to accomplish his goals, the first half is kind of like him reorganizing the rebellion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the Sons of Ares, their civilization is on Mars.
Yes.
And it's like kind of a hidden community.
Mm-hmm. And Several's taken charge while he's been gone. For
the past year, while Darrow has been tortured, Severo has been the leader. And he's really assumed this role as the heir of Ares.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Which is great and interesting because he and Darrow, when they reunite, they have this conflict. And the first half of the book I loved for that reason. But the second half, it kind of felt like, okay, now Darrow's the leader. I know I brushed over Darrow assuming leadership over Severo. But we'll get back to that later.
Yeah.
The second half is like, Darrow's now the leader. Okay, let's go to Pluto. Is it Pluto? There's an ice planet.
I think it's Neptune.
It's some kind of like...
It's the place that the Obsidians are from.
Yes.
It's Ragnar's home, which is a character we meet in book 2, which is a replacement for Pax.
Yeah.
Tear
He's
crying.
This big tank. This big lovable, which is a fun character archetype. And obviously Pierce Brown loves that character archetype too. Where it's like big and threatening, but they're actually super cuddly.
Spoiler alert, loves to kill them.
Yes, he does love to kill them off because he knows that's like one of the most endearing character archetypes. This big, lovable lug.
Anyway, sorry.
Anyway, no, it's okay. At that point, it kind of felt like so many things were happening because Darrow needs to go to the Obsidians to recruit their queen and their people to aid them in their fight against the Golds, against the Jackal and the Sovereign.
Yeah, and it's important because the Obsidians are like one step above Reds. They are also lied to and manipulated so that they will continue to be the
slaves.
Backbone. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like the warrior class. They're kind of like Spartans in a way.
Yeah.
But they are slaves. And their world building for the Obsidians is super interesting.
Yes.
But in terms of like pacing and plot for me, it kind of felt like it was rushed. But for me, which is kind of a weird complaint for me to have because I didn't have a problem with those things in the first two books, but maybe that was the problem that you had.
It seems like that little bubble of story was so important and so condensed.
Yeah.
It felt like it needed a little more time to be appreciated. And there were several separate battle scenes in this book, and that one got kind of rushed quite a bit, and I agree I think it should have had more stage time. Yeah. I guess.
Because they do a good job of explaining why they need the Obsidian's help. So, I don't know what the specific problem was. I'd probably have to go back and reread it, and maybe I wouldn't feel that way again. But we know why they need the Obsidian's help, and they go to get the help.
Yeah, they just
don't have enough. There's a lot of obstacles in their way.
They don't have enough armies. They don't have enough manpower, and if they get the Obsidians on their side, then they're golden.
Yeah. Hee-haw. There's plenty of obstacles that are in their way once they reach the Obsidian planet, and they achieve their goal, and then they continue the rebellion.
Yes.
So, like, on paper, it should be really satisfying.
Yes.
I don't know if you had a problem with the pacing overall of the story of the third book or not.
Yeah, I read the first half and then didn't read it for like a week and a half and then read the second half. So, and I stopped right after that point, so maybe I didn't notice the issue because I took a big break in the middle of the book. But it kind of felt a little bit like static almost. Like,
so where specifically did you stop?
I stopped right after that moment where they got the Obsidians on their team.
Okay.
And then I stopped reading for
it does feel like a natural resting point, kind of.
Yes. Which, funny enough, I also stopped reading the second book halfway through and didn't pick it back up for a while. So, I don't know. Maybe it's a me thing.
No, I think because I must have felt the same way. Maybe the storytelling is a little bit too formulaic. Where it's like, I'm sure if you broke it down to like Save the Cat or Hero's Journey, it would be like following that formula beat for beat. And maybe it is just natural to kind of have a resting period at the top of the second arc.
I guess so.
Second act, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, the last half of the book, did you find that at all rushed or interesting?
Well, I don't know. I think I'm neutral.
Okay.
I think I'm neutral because I don't have a drastic opinion either way.
Okay.
But did you feel like it was rushed?
I think so, but maybe my problem with it was I think rebellion stories are difficult to write or to tell.
Yeah.
You could go the Mockingjay route, which is the wrong route.
Yes. Yes.
No. I think what she wanted to say about rebellions, just talking about the theme alone, not the plot, not the characters, whatever, is power will always corrupt people.
Yes.
And so the only thing you can focus on is like the small things that you can control, like the people that you love. Just a fine theme, but it just felt so dark, and the way that it was told was really depressing.
Well, plus it was like, okay, well then what was all of it for?
Yeah.
If we're just
like, that's what she's supposed to learn.
What? Yeah.
Also, whatever. I'm not going to get into it. Or you can go what I felt like the Red Rising route was, which is, spoiler alert, they overthrow the Empire. To me, I can't remember specifically how those things happened. And maybe that's a problem where it's like, I can not remember exactly how the second half of the book goes. I remember the first half. I remember Darrow and Severo butting heads. And I remember going to the Obsidian Ice Planet. And I remember there's a big standoff at the end between all the main characters.
Yes.
Jackal, Sovereign's there. Darrow, Mustang, Aja. Right? It's this big fight scene. That's what he does best, right?
Yes.
Big battles, fight scenes. But thematically, it ends on a much brighter note. And because of that, it kind of feels hollow.
Yeah, there's an interesting moment at the end when Darrow and his group have defeated Aja, and they're talking to the Sovereign before they defeat the Jackal. And the Sovereign is like, what are you gonna do? The same thing's gonna happen when you're in charge 100 years later. You know, saying what Mockingjay said. And there's a great moment when Darrow's like, no, we'll be different. It's not colors anymore, it's humanity. You know, like, there's this great, like, everybody has a vote. You know what I mean? It's kind of like,
democracy
it's just
will
so
save
funny
us.
when fantasy does rebellion and then they're like, democracy. I think it's so funny. It just seems so out of place to me. Yeah,
it does. And it kind of reminds me, you haven't watched this, but the Game of Thrones TV show, which I loved up until a certain point, they end that story on like the exact same note, but it's done so poorly. Like one of the comic relief characters, everyone, the good guys beat the dragons at the end, right? Whatever. Yeah. And they're all sitting around like, how are we going to organize our government? And one of them's like, what about democracy? And then all the characters laugh at him. And it is so cringy and horrible. Gosh.
Yeah, I agree. I think
it's not as bad as in Red Rising. Not nearly as bad.
Much better. But it still kind of feels similar to me. But I don't know how to solve a rebellion. If you have any suggestions on great rebellions that don't end in the democracy, everybody gets a vote, we'll elect a leader type thing, please drop them below, because I would like to experience a good one. I would too. Or just a different one. Yeah, I want more new perspectives of like, because that is obviously something that speaks to humans. Yes. On a, intrinsic level. Where it's like, how do we organize power in a ethical, moral way? That's super interesting. Yeah. It's kind of hard to believe that like, oh, a Luke Skywalker could be born one day in America. And they'll like change the system from within, and then we'll worship this person. It's like, they saved us all and now we live in a utopia. Yeah. Which is part of what I liked about Mockingjay, actually, is that it felt like a realistic approach to that problem. Yeah. Like, in this book, oftentimes they say death begets death, or pain begets pain. begets pain or whatever.
Which is something true that I believe in.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's kind of what Mockingjay does, where they're at the end, they're like, hey, we're all in charge, what do we do now? And they're like, let's put the capital children in the Hunger Games.
Yeah. And Katniss is like, yep, I agree.
Yeah.
So she has like a negative arc.
Yeah.
Which is, all that stuff for me was super unsatisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if it was like, you take thematically what Mockingjay said and you combine it with something like Red Rising.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you have someone like Darrow who believes in forgiveness and change.
Mm-hmm.
You have these secondary characters who go from bad to good and from good to bad. And you have a bit of a pessimistic point of view. Maybe I would agree with that more.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. And they don't... oftentimes also in rebellions, the epilogue is like, and they had babies and they lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
And they never actually solve the power problem.
That's exactly what happens in Mockingjay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's also what happens in Red Rising, too.
Yes, it does.
Which is so funny to me.
Yeah.
I did not see that one coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like...
that Mustang had a baby.
Oh, okay.
And that's why she was gone in the second book.
That's why she left. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, it was good.
It's kind of like your traditional happy ending.
Yes, but once again, Pierce Brown avoids the complex conversation between Mustang and Darrow.
Yeah.
I don't know, she's like, close your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Open your eyes, it's your son.
I felt like that was a little hollow too, actually.
Yeah. Which, it was fine, and there was a great dialogue at the end of like, I'm going to make the world better for my children.
I'm a builder.
I'm going to create something new for the people I love, which was good, but I don't know, it's just so silly. Yeah.
It was really like, this is what's supposed to happen at the end of the story. Type of happy ending.
Yeah. Which, still enjoyable. There's a reason why everybody does it, I guess.
Yeah. No, it was a satisfying conclusion.
Yeah.
But I think maybe I wanted something more poignant that said, like, okay, so here's a book that we're going to be reading in the future, which is Guards. Mm-hmm. It has a great cynical point of view about how government and power is used in the real world. I'm very much looking forward to you reading it.
Yeah.
And that is handled very well, where it's like they contrast tons of humor, tons of like absurdist comedy with a very subtle undercurrent of like, there's nothing we can do to kill a dragon. And the dragon is a metaphor, right? Yeah. I'm giving too much away, but you'll pick it up anyway. Yeah. It's not really a spoiler. And that to me was a really satisfying book because it's like, okay, I do then agree with the theme where it's like, there's nothing we can do to stop these powerful governments from doing what they want, really. Like you and I, who are we? Yes. We're nothing.
I am no Luke Skywalker.
No, me neither. And Luke Skywalker does not exist.
Yes.
And neither does, I almost called her Harrowhawk, Katniss. Oh, yes. Right? Or Darrow. Like, these are just storybook characters. Yeah. It's a fantasy, right? I would love to read a story, and this is what Guards does well, where it's like, you get your fun story, but when you're an adult and you read it, then you pick up the cynical point of view of like, the only thing you could really focus on is yourself and trying to find some happiness and joy in this life. Yeah. Like, focus on controlling the things that you can control. And I've been talking about this too much already. You're good. But that's what I feel like these stories are about. These stories of rebellion, like Mockingjay, like Morningstar. And I know that I really did not like Mockingjay, and I talked about it for an hour. Yeah. And I wanted to talk about it for 2 hours. But maybe I've come around to like, I think I agree more with the theme in that book, even though I hate to admit it. Yeah. Versus Red Rising, which kind of felt like a Disney ending. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, it feels like there is a better answer out there. I just haven't found it yet. Yeah. Or I haven't read the book that handles it in the way I want it to be handled yet, yeah. You know? Same here. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. I don't know how to write rebellion. I don't know either, but that's probably the only downside that I had about the third book for me. Yeah. Everything else, the character dynamics were amazing. Some of the best that I've ever read. Yeah. The plot itself, the action scenes are super exciting.
Mm-hmm. Very well written.
The world building is great.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it also the author does a great job at expanding it every book too.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of my problem with the whole Obsidian thing, which is like their world is so interesting to me. I would love more of that.
Yeah.
It'd be fun just to read like a novella of like, how did Ragnar grow up?
Oh my gosh.
Or maybe his sister, his rise to power, who's super interesting.
Yes.
And we didn't really explain what that world is like. Maybe we could a bit.
Yeah, it's basically Norse mythology, Viking kind of stuff, where the Golds have curated. They basically cast actors to sit in their world and pretend to be Loki, to be like, if you disobey the gods, you'll never reach Valhalla. And all of the Obsidians are like,
it's true.
Look at these thunderstorms in the sky that happen after I did something bad, and it's really just golds flying around in spaceships
with their sci-fi magic.
So interesting, so fun. And all of the Obsidians are, I mean, you would believe that.
Yeah, of course.
If you were told that, and if the people in charge of you made it look real.
Yeah, their planet is an open-air prison, right? And the Golds have technology that looks like magic.
Yes.
Because it's so powerful.
Yeah, and because they keep the Obsidians at such a low level of development in that. You know?
Purposefully, right?
It's interesting.
And they give them this religion, basically. It's based on Norse mythology, like you said, which is super cool.
Yes.
I love Norse mythology.
Yeah.
I love God of War. Just as a side note, it's based on Norse mythology. It's so good. And I wanted more of that personally.
Well, it's fun because we get a lot of Greek and Roman mythology in the first book. The second book has a sprinkling here and there.
But it's already established. They don't really expand on it too much.
They pick up where they left off, but they don't expand as much. But then we get some fun Norse new stuff, and it's like, ooh,
cool.
Okay.
How does this work?
I want more.
Yeah.
And we even get, like, even in the leadership and the way that their society is structured, like, the heir to the throne has taken a vow of silence.
Which is cool.
Which is so cool and
who's
incredible.
Ragnar's sister.
Yes, who's Ragnar's sister. She's the only one of her siblings who is allowed to stay. Because their mother sold the rest of her children.
Yeah. It's a really
fantastic.
Harsh society. But it's crazy how quickly he builds that out and makes it feel so real and interesting.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Yeah, I would love to read a novella.
Yeah. Like, even if you, like, started from scratch.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you could read this on its own and get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool too.
So the leader of the Obsidians is always a matriarch?
Yes.
Okay. That was interesting. And there are tons of different tribes around the planet, right? But there's one main matriarch?
Yes.
Or each tribe is independent of each other? I can't remember. Anyway, I remember so much more about their travels on that planet than I do about the plot of the rest of the book, which I think is kind of an issue.
I do too, and I think maybe it's because that was so unique and interesting and new versus all the other stuff is like picked up from book 1 and book 2. Yeah. There's not a lot of new goals.
No.
Other than, we have Ragnar now? Oh, Ragnar's willing to go get the rest of his family to come and help us win this war?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it would have been cool if like the rest of the book took place just on the ice planet.
Yeah, maybe that's where the final battle takes place.
That would be cool.
And they could have gone from all of these golds with crazy technology and then being like, okay, human civilization before technology, we're going to win anyway.
Yeah.
That would have been fun.
Kind of a return to the first book where it's like these kids are fighting each other with sticks and stones.
Yeah.
Even though they live in a sci-fi world.
That would have been interesting.
Strip those things away from them. It kind of happens, you know.
Yeah.
But not to the extent that I would have loved it. And maybe it has to do with, like, just literally changing the environment.
Yeah.
Maybe that's all that I wanted.
Yeah.
Where it's like, the second book I got plenty of space battles.
And
that was fun.
Plenty of moon space battles, too.
Yeah, and that stuff was cool. Like, I love the scene when, in the second book, I believe it's when Severo and Darrow, like, shoot themselves in spacesuits onto the Sovereign's ship.
Yeah.
And overtake it. Like, so wow, cool. What a cool scene.
Uh-huh.
It's so epic and grand scale. And then I feel like in the third book, all the space battle scenes were kind of the same.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely liked how in the first book we got this grand ground.
Grand ground.
Like the first book takes place on the Earth. It's not the Earth.
It's more grounded.
Yeah, and it's fun to
tribal.
explore that. And then second one, we get space battles.
Yeah.
And then third one, we get more space battles. Versus that fun ice planet. You're like, whoa!
What happens here? What are the rules?
There are cannibals hunting them down.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I forgot about the cannibals.
It's epic.
Yeah. All that stuff was super cool. I wish we had just spent more time in it personally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, plus, this is a side note, but it just tells you how interesting that plot was that the cannibals ate all the gold people because they believe what they eat, they will become in the next life. So if they eat the gold people,
that is so
their next life will be as a gold.
Isn't that awesome?
It's just thrown in there, another example of just a small little thing that's really impactful overall.
Yeah, makes the world feel unique, right?
And very well thought out.
Yeah. Maybe here's what I found unsatisfying about a rebellion story. Is in a rebellion story, real rebellions require mass movement, like millions of people being convinced to change the way that your government is operated. Especially
if it's in a sci-fi space setting with travel.
Yeah, where it's like each planet is populated with billions.
Yeah.
And Mockingjay had the same problem, where it's like, it was an interesting idea for the plot to be about Katniss filming propaganda that convinced the people to rebel against the Capitol. My problem is that we didn't really see the effect of her propaganda. Like, what districts are we specifically broadcasting to? What's their problem? And how does Katniss filming propaganda help solve that?
Yeah.
To convince them to fight against the Capitol. And I think there's kind of a similar problem with Red Rising as well. It might just be a problem of the genre. And we can look to real life examples of when rebellions were successful, but those stories might just not be as interesting because they don't follow a single protagonist. In Red Rising, Morningstar, Darrow goes to the Obsidian planet and his goal is to convince the Obsidians to fight with him against the Golds. So how does he do that? He has to talk to the leaders and tell them the truth of what their life is like.
Yeah.
That would be an earth-shattering revelation.
But they already knew.
They already knew. But
then he's like, what do I do next? Okay, I'll go talk to your gods and show your people the truth.
And it's basically like a couple of like office workers.
They're like LARPing too. That's the best part.
They're pretending to be scarred golds. They're just regular golds, like a receptionist and I don't know, a janitor.
Sir, improv rehearsal starts in 10 minutes. We don't have time for this.
I don't want to dress up as Loki.
I love it.
Which was hilarious.
As a theater kid, I loved it.
Yeah. But that was super interesting to me. Watching him actually convince the Obsidians, like how does he actually convince this entire people that the Golds are bad guys? And Pierce Brown characterizes that with like the matriarch who's Ragnar's mother and his sister. The sister's a great character because she's a little untrustworthy too.
Yes.
He does that with a lot of his characters where they're kind of morally gray. You don't know what their true motivations are.
Yes.
Which makes them really compelling. A scene like that doesn't happen in Mockingjay and I would have loved it.
Yes.
Where it's like Katniss is like, why isn't District 6 working with us? I'm going to go there and I'm going to convince them to help us out.
Yeah, it
I would have loved
really
that.
Happen. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it's hard to make that feel believable. Where it's like, I've convinced this entire nation to go with me.
It's interesting. It's the same issue as the democracy thing never working. We don't actually live in a fantasy world, so we don't know what would work for real. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I don't know.
You could...
Not that everything has to be correct and historically accurate, especially not in a sci-fi fantasy. But
no. But it would be nice to know, well, that's part of why we read stories, right?
Yeah.
Internally, we want to know, okay, is revenge always a good thing? That's something that we struggle with intrinsically as humans. That's Darrow's story. You can actually say something about that that feels real. Maybe there's someone in your life that you feel revenge towards.
Yes.
But you read this book and you learn, forgiveness is the option. It feels hollow, but when you read a 600-page book, it feels more satisfying. Same with Tuck Everlasting. You can also do that with other aspects of life, like how government is organized. And I've been rambling about this for too long.
You're fine.
But stories are a great microcosm of our lives. where it's like in 3 books, in 3 weeks, you can read a story about rebellion, and it will teach you something about how we should organize our government.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's what storytelling should be for.
Yeah.
So I just want more stories that handle that problem specifically.
Yeah.
About how do rebellions work, and how do you organize society in an ethical and moral way, in a way that feels realistic and not hollow or too cynical.
Yeah, it's fun to be able to experience those kinds of lifetimes just from the comfort of your own couch.
Yeah, I agree.
It's fun.
I guess one rebellion story that you could look at from real life is, well, how was America founded? The story of the revolution against the British Empire.
Yeah.
We have our main characters for that. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, right?
Yeah.
But who's the Luke Skywalker, right? That's what I think people want from a book.
Yeah.
Right?
It's easier to follow, and it's easier to relate to what's happening if you're following that one person the whole time.
Yeah.
Versus if you're like, oh, a chapter from Alexander Hamilton.
No,
okay.
Yeah. And maybe the problem is a rebellion story is just really, really big. Obviously.
Yeah.
An overstatement of the year.
Yeah.
Understatement of the year.
Yes.
And it's difficult to do. So, I don't know. I don't have a solution.
I want to read more. I want to experience more stories like that.
So do I.
It's interesting.
I'm sorry I talked over you for the last half of this podcast.
No, not at all. It's all about taking turns. You're fine.
Was there anything else that you wanted to say about this book?
Nope. It was good. What? Is that not what I'm supposed to say?
I feel like you were just waiting for me to stop talking so you could just be like, I'm done talking about this book.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. I was liking listening.
No, it's okay.
It's interesting.
It was just funny that you boiled down all your thoughts to, yeah, it was pretty good. After like an hour-long discussion about like storytelling and life and government.
My favorite part of the whole book still was the character relationships.
Yeah.
Even if they at times disappointed me.
Okay, yeah, like his relationship with Mustang specifically.
And Pierce Brown really can write an action scene. It was so fun to read all the spaceship battles. I was like, what? It's fun. Can I not have an opinion?
Your reaction is just so funny to me because it's
that's because I'm autistic.
No, that's not what it is. I don't know. It just felt so bland. Like, what? Wow. That was crazy. I don't
know what a spaceship battle is like.
No, it's fine. You're doing an adequate job at describing the way that you feel. I don't think we're suited for conversation.
Well, thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, subscribe.
Yeah, comment your favorite rebellion story down below so we can read someone do it right.
Yes. If you have any recommendations, please let us know. We got a recommendation in a video 5 days ago.
We'll have to read it.
Yes. And I responded after 5 days. We are good at this.
Thank you, devout commenter.
Thank you for leaving a comment. We'll put your name here. I probably won't.
Sorry.
Thank you for watching. Goodbye.
Goodbye.